I'm Teisha with Shalom TV's news update for Tuesday, September the 10th, 2013. Reuters reports that Syrian Prime Minister Wael al-Khalki said today that his country supported a Russian proposal for Damascus to place its chemical weapons under international control. Syrian state television quoted Khalki as saying the government backed the initiative in order to, quote, spare Syrian blood. Reuters had reported earlier today that the Interfax news agency quoted Syria's foreign minister also saying that his government has accepted the proposal from Russia. Interfax cited Walid al-Muallem as telling the Speaker of Russia's lower parliament house in Moscow that we held a very fruitful round of talks with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov yesterday, and he proposed an initiative relating to chemical weapons. Further saying, and in the evening we agreed to the Russian initiative. The Associated Press reports that Lavrov said that Russia is now working with Syria to prepare a detailed plan of action, which will be presented shortly, and that Russia will then be ready to finalize the plan together with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. U.S. President Barack Obama said yesterday that the Russian proposal could be potentially a significant breakthrough, but he remained skeptical as to whether Syria would actually follow through, and Israeli President Shimon Peres cautioned against putting too much stock into the Russian deal. Peres said the Syrians are not trustworthy and that their acceptance of the proposal did not mean very much. White House spokesman Jay Carney said today that while the Russian proposal could have potential, President Obama would still go ahead with his plan to ask Congress to approve the use of military force in Syria. Carney said on MSNBC this morning, "We see this as potentially a positive development, and we see it as a clear result of the pressure that has been put on Syria by the fact that the president has been moving forward and taking his proposal that we engage in limited strikes against Syria in response to Syria's use of chemical weapons against a civilian population." Carney added, though, that the president does believe that we need to take action in reaction to Syria's blatant violation of this long-standing international prohibition against the use of chemical weapons. Reuters reported that following the reported Syrian acceptance of the Russian proposal, several congressional aides said a vote on whether to authorize action in Syria may be postponed. And further, that reports that U.S. Representative Jean Green said that the White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough told Democratic members of the U.S. House of Representatives today that diplomacy rather than military action is the priority on Syria now. After leaving a briefing by McDonough for House Democrats, Green told Reuters, "We're going to wait and see how this offering for securing Syria's chemical weapons arsenal plays out." And the Jerusalem Post reports that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, testifying before the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committee today, said that President Obama's preferred path through the Syrian crisis, quote, has been and is diplomacy.
We're waiting for that proposal, but we're not waiting for long. President Obama will take a hard look at it, but it has to be swift, it has to be real, it has to be verifiable. It cannot be a delaying tactic, and if the United Nations Security Council seeks to be the vehicle to make it happen, that cannot be allowed to simply become a debating society.
President Obama is set to address the U.S. on the Syrian issue later tonight. Representatives from the European Union met today with Israeli officials from the Foreign Ministry to try and hammer out an understanding on the implementation of the settlement guidelines that were issued recently by the EU, which bar funding of Israeli organizations operating over the Green Line. Secretary General of the European External Action Service, Pierre Vimont, and its Director for North Africa, Middle East, Arabian Peninsula, Iran, and Iraq, Christian Berger, were set to meet today with Israeli Foreign Ministry Director General Rafi Barak, Deputy Director General Ron Curiel, and other senior ministry officials to try and come to some sort of an agreement on the implementation that will allow Israel to continue to participate in EU programs. The guidelines, which were published in July, ordered an end to any EU financial cooperation with any Israeli entity beyond the pre-1967 borders, including East Jerusalem. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on Saturday had urged the EU to delay action on the guidelines while the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations were underway. Diplomatic officials said ahead of today's meeting that while it was unlikely the guidelines would be changed, the hope was that understandings would be reached regarding their implementation that will make them more palatable to Israel. In an annual summary of security incidents in the West Bank this year, Binyamin Regional Brigade Commander Colonel Yossi Pinto said yesterday that there had been an increase in the planning and setting up of cells for terror attacks in the area. He said there is no dramatic rise in the level of terrorism, but there is a rise in the quality of the infrastructure and the planning of terror attacks. Pinto warned that instability in other parts of the region could have an impact on the territories. He said in recent weeks, we again found ourselves in a challenging period. What is happening in Syria and Egypt may be far, but it can also reach us very quickly. He said our mission has been and remains to defend the communities of Binyamin and this country, a mission that has become more complex in recent months. Pinto added that his forces will continue to be ready for every incident, small or large. Last week, Israeli security forces led by Israel's security agency, the Shin Bet, announced that they had foiled a bomb plot by members of Hamas planning to target the Mamilla Mall in central Jerusalem. 2 Palestinians from East Jerusalem who were employed as maintenance workers at the mall were arrested together with a Hamas member from Ramallah. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews partnered with El Al Israel Airlines and with the Association for the Welfare of Israel's Soldiers in order to fly lone soldiers back home for the Jewish holidays. As part of the initiatives, members of El Al's Frequent Flyers Club donated some of their accumulated points for the program. For each point donated, El Al matched it with an additional one, with the fellowship completing the cost of the trip. President of the fellowship, Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, said regarding the program that lone soldiers choose to serve in the IDF despite great difficulty and without family support. He said lone soldiers in the IDF are exemplary citizens of Israel and of the entire Jewish world. Well, a Holocaust-themed game is set to be released for smartphone users by British game developer Luke Bernard. Bernard's game is called Imagination is the Only Escape. It was rejected by gaming giant Nintendo back in 2008, who, according to the New York Times, had deemed it unfit for children. But after a crowdfunding campaign, the game may very well hit the market soon. The game looks at the events of the Holocaust through a child's eyes. It features the character of a young boy named Samuel during the Nazi occupation of France in 1942, who seeks to escape real life into his own fantasy world. Bernard told the Times that his mother is Jewish and that her mother looked after orphaned Jewish children after World War II. He told technology website The Verge that the game is meant to inspire players to read up on the history of the Holocaust. He also said it's about making people feel. I want people to feel something with this title, and then once they finish it, to actually think differently. And finally today, a city in northern Israel plans on becoming the world's first city to replace all of its public lighting fixtures with cost-effective LED bulbs. Ma'alot Tarshisha, which is a mixed Jewish-Arab city near Nahariya in the western Galilee, began its lighting overhaul this week, which will replace 13,000 light fixtures in public institutions and on the streets by the end of the year. By the time the project is complete, the city of approximately 20,000 people will save more than 80% of its electricity costs associated with public lighting in the next decade. According to the municipality's Deputy Director General Silas Libilia, the money saved will be transferred to a dedicated investment fund that will be used to implement and integrate energy efficiency infrastructure and water programs. The LED project is called Going to the Light and is administered by the Israeli startup company Juganu Systems. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Tuesday, September the 10th, 2013. I'm Teisha Bader.